Red Hollow sat in the middle of nowhere, a sun-baked speck on the frontier where the wind never stopped moaning and the dust never stopped moving. The land around it was brittle as bone, cracked and yellow, scattered with sagebrush and rusted wagon wheels left from travelers who'd given up trying to reach anywhere better. The kind of town where men came to disappear, or to be forgotten. At its center stood the broken Spur saloon, leaning a little to the west as if tired of standing. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of spilled whiskey, sweat, and regret. A battered piano wheezed out a half-hearted tune from the corner, played by a man who seemed as old as the instrument itself. Spurs clinked against warped floorboards, boots scraped, and laughter rolled in uneven bursts like thunder with no rain behind it. Behind the counter stood Elias Boon, a man who blended into the background so well that most folks forgot he was there until they needed a drink. He was in his late 60s, maybe older. No one knew for sure. His gray beard was kept neat, trimmed close, and his eyes, though gentle, carried a shadow that made some men uneasy without knowing why. He moved slowly but never lazily, his hand steady as he cleaned glass after glass with the same rag that had seen too many nights. That was how he spent most of his days, polishing, pouring, and keeping quiet. The regulars called him Old Rag, half joking, half mean. "Hey, Old Rag," one of them would shout, slamming an empty glass down. "You miss a spot, old man." Elias would look up, nod politely, and refill the glass without a word. His voice, when he spoke, was soft, just enough to be heard, never enough to start trouble. Some nights, when the whiskey loosened tongues, they'd make sport of him. Stories spun about how he'd once been a doctor, a preacher, or a runaway husband who'd lost his mind. Elias never corrected them. He let the tales change shape as they wished, the same way he let time roll over him. He had the look of a man who'd already heard every insult the world could throw and decided none were worth answering. It was late afternoon when the doors creaked open and Sheriff Harlan wandered in. The sheriff was a big man with a gut full of beer and a badge that had lost its shine. He dropped onto a stool and grunted. "Boone, you hear the news?" Elias poured him a shot of rye. "No, Sheriff. Can't say I have. McGraw riders are heading this way. Word is they hit a payroll wagon up north, left 6 men dead in the dust, probably riding south to lose the trail." Harlan downed his drink in one gulp, wiped his mouth on his sleeve. "If they come through here, you keep that soft mouth shut. You hear me? Let me handle it." Elias nodded. "Wouldn't dream of doing otherwise." "Good." The sheriff squinted at him. "You're too old to get heroic ideas. You just keep to your glasses." "I've no quarrel with anybody, Sheriff." "Let's keep it that way." The sheriff left, boots thudding, spurs jingling, and Elias went back to polishing. For a long time, the only sound was the slow scraping of cloth against glass and the piano's broken rhythm. The talk at the tables grew low, the kind that carried unease, like a smell of smoke on the wind before you see the fire. Red Hollow had seen its share of outlaws, but the McGraw riders were another breed. 6 men led by Rafe McGraw, a name whispered like a curse from Kansas to Arizona. They robbed payroll trains, burned ranches, and left their mark with the same cold precision as a rattlesnake bite. Nobody in Red Hollow had the stomach to face them, least of all Sheriff Harlan, whose courage tended to fade when his bottle ran dry. As the sun bled down behind the hills, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and stirring the dust along Main Street. Elias glanced up at the saloon swinging doors, his hands pausing for the first time that day. The rag hung still between his fingers. A man who'd spent his life reading faces could also read silence, and the silence that fell just before trouble always had a sound of its own. Outside, horses snorted, spurs hit dirt. Then came laughter, not the kind that warmed a room, but the kind that emptied one. The saloon's doors banged open. 6 riders entered, their coats heavy with trail dust, eyes sharp and mean. Rafe McGraw led them, a tall man with a scar across his cheek and a smile that looked carved from stone. The piano stopped. Conversations died midward. "Well, hell," Rafe said, sweeping his hat off and dropping it on the counter. "Ain't this a cozy hole? Smells like bad whiskey and old men." Elias met his gaze calmly. "Evening." What'll it be? Everything, Rafe said, grinning. Pour for my boys. We've had a long ride and dry throats. Elias began to pour. His hands didn't shake. The whiskey streamed clean, and even into 6 glasses. One of the riders snorted. Look at him. The old-timer's got nerves of stone. Rafe chuckled. Or he's just too dumb to know who we are. He leaned forward, his eyes glinting under the lantern light. You know the name McGraw, old man? Elias nodded once. Heard it once or twice. Then you know better than to charge us. I don't charge for first drinks, Elias said quietly. Never have. The gang laughed, loud and ugly. Well, look at that. Old Rag's generous, one jeered. You hear that, boys? Drinks on the house. They hooped and slammed their glasses, spilling whiskey on the counter. Elias just wiped the mess, slow and careful, the same way he always did. Rafe watched him with an amused sneer. Tell me, barkeep, ever been in a fight? Ever pulled a gun? Elias looked at the man's reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Not in a long while. That's so. Rafe grinned wider. You used to be something then? A soldier, maybe? A preacher? Just a man who learned when to keep quiet. Rafe's grin faltered a little. Something about the way Elias said it, calm, steady, didn't sit right. But pride wouldn't let him show it. He picked up his glass and threw it to the floor. It shattered loud in the silence. Then keep quiet while I drink. Elias nodded once and fetched another rag. The tension was thick enough to choke on, yet his movements never quickened. His breath never hitched. From the far table, the piano man began to play again. A trembling tune, more out of fear than music. Play louder. Rafe barked, and the old man's fingers stumbled across the keys. The other patrons kept their heads down. Nobody dared move. Even the sheriff, if he was anywhere nearby, would have stayed clear. As the minutes passed, the gang's laughter filled the room again, hollow and hard. They mocked Elias's stoop, his silence, the way he polished glasses like they were treasures. Rafe leaned closer across the counter. You ever wonder, old man, what it feels like to be remembered? Or are you happy dying and nobody behind this counter? Elias met his gaze, eyes calm, voice barely above a whisper. Memories ain't always kind, son. Rafe smirked, about to answer, but something in the bartender's expression made him pause. A flicker in those gray eyes, faint and dangerous as lightning far off in the desert. The gang's laughter died down. The air felt colder. Outside, the wind picked up again, moaning through the cracks of the swinging doors. Elias turned back to his work, setting each glass in its place. His hand moved with that same smooth rhythm, as if the world around him didn't matter. But the quiet had weight now, the kind that carried warning. The piano stopped once more. The Broken Spur saloon never slept. Even after the McGraw riders left that night, their laughter lingered like smoke on the walls. Men talked low, women whispered, and every sound carried a nervous edge, like everyone was waiting for thunder they already knew was coming. Elias Boon stayed behind the bar, cleaning up the wreck the gang had left behind. Broken glass, spilled whiskey, and footprints of men who thought the world belonged to them. By the time the lamps burned low, only a few souls remained. The piano man dozed over his keys, the cards had stopped shuffling, and the sheriff was nowhere to be found. Out on the street, the wind dragged the dust along the boardwalk in long, tired sighs. Elias worked quietly. He didn't rush, didn't grumble, just moved in that slow, steady rhythm that had carried him through a lifetime. The world could laugh, the wind could howl, and still his hand would move smooth as the tide. But tonight, his silence carried a tremor that wasn't there before. When the saloon doors banged open again near midnight, every eye jumped to them. The McGraw riders were back. Rafe walked in first, that cruel grin playing across his scarred cheek. His men followed, laughing loud, drunk on the power that came from being feared. Evening, old rag. Rafe shouted. Miss us. Elias didn't look up. You boys drinking again so soon? We figured you'd miss the company, Rafe said, tossing his coat over a chair. Besides, we're not done talking. A man ought to know who he's serving. You never told me who you used to be. I'm who I am, Elias said softly, polishing a glass. That's what ghosts say. Rafe grinned, and the men laughed. "Tell you what, boys, let's make this fun." He turned to the room. "Who here's got a story about our quiet barkeep?" The silence that followed was worse than laughter. Nobody wanted to draw attention, but nobody wanted to be on the wrong side of the gang, either. So a man near the door, drunk and foolish, muttered, "He ain't no one. Just an old man with shaky hands and a dead stare." The riders howled with laughter. Rafe slapped the bar, pointing at Elias. "You hear that? They think you're nobody. You ever held a gun, old man?" Elias set the glass down gently, his eyes meeting Rafe's reflection in the mirror. Once. Rafe leaned in closer. "Once ain't enough out here. You live in the West. You draw or you die. Which was it for you, barkeep?" Elias's hand tightened on the counter, the veins standing out along his wrist. The noise around him faded into a hum, the kind that echoed from another time, another life. He could still smell the smoke of burning cedar and gunpowder, hear the desperate cries of men dying in the dust. Abilene, Kansas, years ago. The air had been red with sunset and gunfire. Elias Boon wasn't old rag then. He was the Iron Hand of Abilene, the man who'd outdrawn every killer from Dodge to Santa Fe. A legend wrapped in dust and iron, the kind of man mothers warned their sons not to cross. But legends burn out like the last coal in a dying fire. He remembered the day it ended. A small house outside Abilene, a woman's voice singing in the dusk. Her name was Clara, hair the color of wheat, eyes full of storms and mercy. She'd believed in him when no one else did, even when his name filled men with fear. He'd promised her he was done with blood. He'd promised to hang up his gun and build her a home instead. That promise died the night a gang came for him, men thirsting for the bounty on his head. They'd set fire to his house. He'd gunned them down one by one, but when the smoke cleared, Clara was gone, her songs silenced forever. He'd buried her with his own hands, the dirt wet with tears and blood, and laid his revolver beside her. He'd walked away from Abilene that night and never looked back, never drew again, never would. The sound of laughter pulled him back to the saloon. Rafe McGraw was leaning over the counter now, eyes full of mockery and danger. "You fall asleep, old man?" "No," Elias said quietly. "Just remembering something you're too young to understand." "Oh," Rafe smirked. "What's that?" "The price men pay for thinking they can't fall." Rafe's grin faltered. He didn't like how those words felt. You talk big for someone polishing glasses. He gestured to his men. "Maybe we teach you some manners, huh?" One of them grabbed the piano man by the collar, yanking him off the bench. "Play, old fool. Or maybe your hands need a reminder." Elias's eyes lifted. "Leave him." The rider laughed. "Or what?" Elias didn't answer. He just looked at him, steady, cold, unblinking. It was enough to make the man hesitate for half a breath before Rafe barked, "Do it." The thug shoved the pianist into the floor, sending keys crashing in a discordant clang. Whiskey sloshed, chairs toppled. The crowd stayed frozen. The sheriff was nowhere. Not a single soul stood up. That was Red Hollow, a town of watchers, cowards wearing hats too big for their hearts. At the far table, a small figure peered through the haze, a boy of maybe 12, hat too large for his head, eyes too wide for his age. Tommy, the blacksmith's son. He'd been sweeping floors earlier, staying late to earn a few coins. He watched Elias now with something the others didn't have, faith. He'd seen how Elias moved, how nothing ever startled him, how even in chaos his hands never trembled. Tommy didn't know the story, but he could feel it in the air, the quiet power coiled beneath the surface. "Come on, barkeep." Rafe shouted. "Pour another round. Show us some respect." Elias did. He poured 6 glasses, without spilling a drop, not even when one of the men snatched the bottle from his hand and smashed it against the counter, laughing. "Look at that," Rafe sneered. "He's too old to fight back. You ever wonder how it feels to die useless, Boon?" That name hadn't been spoken in years. Elias's eyes flickered just once. Rafe grinned wider. "Oh, I know things. I heard stories about a gunman by that name, the Iron Hand of Abilene. Killed more men than cholera, they say." Then he up and vanished. He leaned close enough that Elias could smell the whiskey on his breath. "That was you, wasn't it?" The saloon held its breath. The piano man froze mid-motion, Tommy's eyes went wide, and even the riders went quiet for a beat. Elias didn't move. "You tell too many stories, son." Rafe slammed his palm on the counter. "I'm talking to you, old man." Elias looked up then, really looked. The calm in his face was gone, replaced by something heavier, colder. "And I'm listening to." The tension stretched thin as a drawn bowstring. Every creak of the floor sounded like thunder. Then Rafe laughed, breaking it. "Hell, I like you, Boon. You got fire under all that dust. Don't worry, we ain't killing you yet. We'll let you keep your broom till the sun comes up." They turned their laughter loose again, smashing bottles, tossing chairs, making a storm of noise that felt more cruel than any gunfight. When they finally left near dawn, the saloon looked like a battlefield. Tables overturned, whiskey soaking into the floorboards, the piano broken again. The few townsfolk who'd stayed slipped out into the street without a word. The sheriff never came. Elias stood among the wreckage alone. The lantern light caught the glass shards on the floor, turning them into scattered stars. Tommy stepped forward timidly, holding out a broom. "You want me to help, mister?" Elias took the broom gently from his hands. "Go home, boy. Ain't no place for you here tonight." Tommy hesitated. "They'll be back." "I know." Night settled over Red Hollow like a curse. The wind had gone still, and the only light came from the lanterns flickering in the broken Spur saloon. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of whiskey, sweat, and the fear of men too used to pretending they weren't afraid. Elias Boon stood behind the counter, polishing glasses as always, though the night before had left the place battered. Broken tables, cracked mirror, shattered pride. But the people came anyway. They always did, because no one in Red Hollow wanted to drink alone with their guilt. Martha moved between the tables, her red hair tied back, face pale, but steady. She'd worked here for years, through drunks, fights, and the slow decay of the town itself. Folks liked to say she had more backbone than any man in Red Hollow, and Elias suspected they were right. She poured drinks with a smile that wasn't real anymore, and each time her eyes met Elias's, there was a silent question there. How long could this go on? The answer came sooner than either of them wanted. Hoofbeats. 6 of them. Heavy, deliberate, and wrong. The sound of boots hitting the porch followed, then the swing of the saloon doors that seemed to slice through the music, and laughter all at once. The McGraw riders were back. Rafe McGraw entered first, hat tilted low, his smile sharp and tired. His hand was wrapped in a dirty bandage where he'd caught glass the night before, but the pain only seemed to feed his cruelty. Behind him came his men, grinning, drunk, and looking for something to destroy. Well, Rafe drawled, stepping inside. "Our favorite barkeep's still breathing. Guess ghosts really don't die easy." No one answered. Martha froze mid-step. The piano stopped playing. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hesitate between ticks. Elias kept cleaning a glass, voice calm as the desert after rain. "You boys riding quiet. Must be running from something." Rafe smirked. "You talk too pretty for a man who ought to be begging." He looked around at the townsfolk. "Ain't this a fine place? Shame to see it burn." No one laughed. Not this time. Rafe noticed. His grin faded to something harder. "Pour us whiskey, barkeep. And none of that watered stuff. Tonight we drink proper." Elias poured. 6 glasses. One after another. Not a tremor in his hands. The liquid caught the light. Gold as a promise. Smooth as silence. Rafe downed his in one swallow and slammed the glass down. "Now we're talking. Ain't we, boys?" The men cheered loud and hollow. They started to shove chairs, knock bottles over, turning the saloon into their playground. Martha tried to collect the shards, but one of the riders, big, mean, eyes like cold stone, grabbed her wrist. "Leave it," he said, voice slurred. "We'll make our own mess." She pulled back, but he didn't let go. The sound of his laughter made Elias's blood stir in ways he hadn't felt in decades. Rafe watched with idle amusement, leaning against the bar, pretending he didn't see. "Martha," Elias said quietly, "step back." She tried, but the man's grip tightened. "She ain't going nowhere, barkeep. We're just talking." Rafe lifted his gun and pointed it lazily toward her face. "Don't spoil our fun, old man. You've had your turn." The room went still. Elias didn't move, didn't blink. His rag rested on the counter. His voice, when it came, was so calm it cut through the noise like a knife through silk. "Son," he said, slow and low, "put that gun down before you meet the man you're mocking." For a second, nobody breathed. Then Rafe threw his head back and laughed. It was a sound too loud, too forced, the kind men make to drown out fear. His gang joined in, slapping tables, roaring until the saloon walls seemed to shake. Elias didn't join them. He just reached for another glass. Rafe sneered. "You think you scare me, old man? You think you can still pull iron? You ain't nothing but dust." Elias's hand moved in a blur. A single motion, smooth, practiced, deadly. The glass he'd been holding flew across the bar, spinning through the air, and shattered against the gunman's wrist. In the same heartbeat, his other hand swept down beneath the counter. A flash of silver. The barkeep's revolver rose like it had never been put away. 2 shots cracked through the room, clean as thunder. The sound echoed long after the smoke cleared. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. 2 men screamed, clutching their bleeding hands where the bullets had found them. Neither fatal, both perfect. Rafe's gun hit the floor, spinning once before it stilled. No one spoke. Elias stood there, gun steady, ice cold. His face was carved from stone, but there was no anger there, just inevitability. "No one dies tonight," he said softly. "Not if you leave." The silence was a living thing. Rafe stared at him, breathing hard, disbelief in his eyes. Who the hell are you?" Elias's voice was barely more than a whisper. "Once they called me Justice. Now I just pour whiskey." The name hit the room like a bell tolling for the dead. The Iron Hand of Abilene. Every man there knew the legend, though most had stopped believing he was real. The killer who never missed. The ghost who disappeared after a blood-soaked night in Kansas. The bartender had never been a bartender at all. Martha stared, her lips trembling. The piano man crossed himself. The crowd held still as statues. Rafe's face twisted from shock to rage. "You think this ends here?" He grabbed his wounded hand, teeth gritted against the pain. "You'll be ashes by dawn. You hear me?" Elias didn't answer. His gun didn't waver. Rafe stumbled backward toward the doors, his men limping after him. One of them kicked over a chair in fury. Another spat blood on the floor. When they finally pushed through the saloon doors, the night swallowed them whole. For a long time, no one moved. The echo of the gunshots hung over the town like a curse. Then someone whispered, "It's him. It's really him." The sheriff wasn't there to see it. He was probably hiding behind his badge somewhere, waiting for someone braver to clean up his mess. The townsfolk began to whisper again, half in awe, half in fear. Elias holstered his revolver, slow and quiet. His hand lingered on it a moment longer than he meant to. Then he set it back beneath the counter, as if putting a ghost to rest. He turned to Martha. "You all right?" She nodded, voice barely steady. "You could have killed them." "I did what needed doing." Her eyes softened. "You saved me." Elias didn't meet her gaze. "No," he said, "just delayed the storm." He picked up a broom and began sweeping glass from the floor. Outside, the sound of distant thunder rolled across the hills, the kind that didn't belong to the sky. Rafe McGraw was still out there, bleeding, burning with hate, and dawn was coming. Elias felt it in his bones, the pull of something he tried to bury years ago, the taste of it, the rhythm of it, the cruel calm that came before violence. He'd promised himself never again, but some promises the world doesn't let a man keep. He paused, looking down at the revolver's reflection in the whiskey-stained wood. His hand hovered over it like a memory that refused to fade. The silence around him grew thick again, as if the saloon itself was holding its breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was low enough that only the wind heard him. "So it begins again." Outside, a coyote howled, and the town of Red Hollow, half asleep, half praying, waited for the dawn. The night before dawn felt too still, too heavy. The town of Red Hollow slept like a man pretending to be dead, hoping the storm would pass him by. Only the saloon lights still burned, dim and golden against the blue of the dying night. Inside, Elias Boon stood alone behind the counter, setting each glass in perfect alignment. Every sound, the scrape of wood, the clink of metal, was measured and final, like a man putting his affairs in order. He'd already cleaned the floor, mended a few broken chairs, and lit the last lantern. Now he checked the revolver. 6 bullets, polished and heavy as memory. The gun fit his hand as if it had never left. He stared at it for a long moment, thumb tracing the edge of the worn grip before he set it down beside the whiskey bottle. A quiet knock broke the silence. "Come in," he said. The door opened slowly. It was Tommy, the blacksmith's boy, clutching his father's old coat around his shoulders. His hair was a mess, his face pale with fear. "They're coming, Mr. Boon," he whispered. "They're camped down by the creek. Sheriff's nowhere. Folks are hiding." Elias nodded, as if that was what he expected. "Go on home, son." "I can't," Tommy said, voice shaking. "You can't fight him alone. There's 6 of them. Rafe's mad, real mad. He said he's gonna burn this town to ash." Elias smiled faintly, though his eyes stayed tired. "I've faced worse odds with worse men." Tommy stepped closer. "Why, Mr. Boon? Why fight at all? You could run. Nobody'd blame you." Elias reached under the counter and pulled out something small, an old, tarnished sheriff's badge. He placed it gently in the boy's palm. "My father wore that," he said. "He died wearing it. I never had the courage to." He looked the boy in the eyes, his voice low and calm. "When this is done, give it to Sheriff Harlan. Tell him it's time someone earned it." Tommy's eyes filled. "You can't." Elias shook his head. "Go home, son. Don't watch what comes next. A man's ghosts ought not pass to a child." The boy hesitated, but something in the old man's tone, something final, made him nod. He backed toward the door, holding the badge tight. Before stepping out, he whispered, "You're not like them, Mr. Boon." Elias looked down at the revolver. "No," he said softly. "That's what scares me most." Outside, the sky began to pale, bleeding pink across the desert horizon. The wind picked up, curling dust along the main street, rattling shutters. Red Hollow was awake, though no one left their homes. Curtains twitched. Doors locked. The town waited for judgment. The sound came next, hoofbeats, slow and deliberate. 6 horses, hooves thudding in rhythm like war drums. The McGraw riders appeared through the dawn haze, their silhouettes black against the rising sun. Rafe rode at the front, his bandaged hand resting on his holster, hatred burning in his eyes. The street was empty but for one man. Elias Boon stepped out from the saloon, coat buttoned, hat low, revolver at his side. The wind tugged at his gray beard, caught the dust in his coat. He moved with the quiet certainty of a man who had walked this road before and knew exactly how it ended. Rafe pulled his horse to a stop. "You got nerve, barkeep," he called, voice echoing down the empty street. "Should have run while you had legs. Now I'll burn your town, and your name with it." Elias's tone was even. "You done enough burning, son. Time you cooled off." Laughter rippled through the gang, hard and brittle. One rider spat into the dust. "Let's put him down." The air tightened. Then silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. A tumbleweed drifted across the road, rolling between them like a ghost deciding who it would follow home. The first gunshot split the dawn. Elias moved faster than the eye could follow. His revolver came up in a blur, muzzle flashing once, twice. 2 riders fell before their guns cleared leather, slumping from their saddles into the dirt. The others scattered, firing wildly, shouting curses that vanished into the wind. Elias ducked behind a water trough, reload smooth, breath steady. The sound of spurs, the scream of horses, the echo of shots. Each beat was precise, measured, inevitable. He fired again. Another man dropped, clutching his chest, his gun skittering into the street. The 5th came around the back, firing from the hip. A bullet grazed Elias's shoulder, spinning him sideways. He grunted, rolled behind a wagon, and returned a single shot that caught the man in the throat. The echo faded into the wind, Smoke curled through the sunlight, twisting like ghosts. The town held its breath. Rafe was the last. He stepped from behind his horse, face pale, rage raw in his eyes. "You think you're justice," he snarled. "You're just another killer hiding behind a legend." Elias's revolver was empty. He holstered it, slow and steady. "Maybe," he said, "but I ain't hiding no more." Rafe drew his gun in one smooth motion. 2 shots cracked almost as one. Elias staggered, a red bloom spreading across his side. Rafe stumbled back, staring in disbelief. A dark hole marked the center of his chest. He dropped to his knees, tried to raise his gun again, but it slipped from his fingers. He fell forward into the dust, his breath rattling once, then gone. Elias swayed, caught himself on the wagon wheel, and sank to one knee. The revolver slipped from his grasp, clattering softly against the wood. The world around him blurred, the morning light, the drifting smoke, the faces peering from doorways. Everything slowed, quieted, as if the desert itself bowed its head. "Mr. Boon," a voice cried. Tommy ran from the edge of the street, badge still clutched in his hand. He dropped beside the old man, tears streaking his dusty face. "Don't you die, you hear me? You can't." Elias smiled faintly, blood wetting his beard. "Ain't dying, son," he whispered. "Just resting." Tommy shook his head. You saved us." The old man's eyes softened. "A man don't stop being who he was," he said, voice barely a breath. "He just learns to serve it quieter." His hand found the boy's shoulder, gave it one last steady squeeze, then fell still. When the sheriff finally arrived, sweating, trembling, half-sober, the street was silent. Smoke drifted in lazy ribbons. The bodies of the McGraw riders lay scattered in the dust. And in the center of it all sat Elias Boon, eyes closed, head bowed, revolver at his side. Harlan swallowed hard, his shame heavy. He took the badge from Tommy's hand and stared at it for a long moment before pinning it to his chest. "Reckon the town's got its lawman now," he said quietly. Tommy looked toward the saloon. "He was more than that," the boy whispered. The sheriff tipped his hat. "Yeah, he was justice." Years later, folks still talked about that morning, the dawn when Red Hollow woke to find its sins washed clean in gun smoke and sunlight. Some said the ghost of the Iron Hand still walked the hills, watching over the town he'd saved. Others swore he'd been just a tired man who remembered too late what he was born to be. But when the wind blew through Red Hollow and rattled the saloon's empty doors, it carried his name softly, like a prayer that had learned to whisper. Elias Boon, the bartender who never missed and never wanted another fight, the man who made the West tremble one last time.